All right, well, we're going live again, although many of you will be seeing this later. All right, they'll be seeing this, they'll be watching the recording later. For those of you who are going to be tuning in live, we will be responding to your questions as quickly as we can. Yesterday, I think we got to, what, like 1%?
Yeah.
1% of the questions.
That's right.
Yeah, so, yeah, but if we see them and we have time, we'll be happy to answer them. So, what are we thinking about the recordings we've been doing?
Well, it's been a great series. We've done quite a few videos already on this topic, Scripture Twisting 101. And I know the name sounds funny, but really it's intended because how many times, guys, you come across arguments either from Muslims or people who are dealing with Muslims that they took a verse from the Bible and all of a sudden they are using it somehow totally out of context. Arguments either from Muslims or
well, no, but I just need to know, are we live on your page? We're going into it, or are we live on your page?
Using it somehow on his page, totally out of context.
All right, because yeah, that's on YouTube, right? Because I want to link to it. Well, to answer your question, the series that we're doing is going to be phenomenal because we're going to catalog the most common passages that Muslims quote out of context to try to trip Christians on various topics. The Trinity, the deity of Christ, salvation, even passages that they misquote to try to point to Mohammed
right.
in the Bible. So what we want to do is have a database of all these passages available on his YouTube page and yours so that people can have easy access to these responses. That's why we're trying to keep these videos within 10 to 12 minutes. We try not to go more than 15 minutes.
And people, of course, can access it at my YouTube channel, CIRA International. That's C as in Charlie, CIRA International, at David's YouTube channel. And Sam, you do have one, right? You know,
I'm building it up slowly but surely. I'm like I'm very slow. I mean, David even like 10 years ago said, you know, you need to get on YouTube because that's the way to go. That's the way of the future. And he's right, because now God has blessed him with the top Christian Apologetic YouTube page. What, you got about 200,000 subscribers now, huh?
Way over 200,000.
See, man? You're just a beacon of just...
No, it's really awesome because, I mean, Christians for 14 centuries who want to deal with Islam have not had these, couldn't have dreamt of having these kinds of opportunities to reach people this quickly around the world. Like even right now, right? Where we can go online and just click live, and within 2 minutes we've got about 200 people watching, and in a few minutes from now it's going to be even more. And these are people from around the world. So no one's had these kind of opportunities for 14th century. So we want to use these opportunities. So we've got some people on here. We can here's an easy question.
Yeah.
Tell us how you feel about One Punch Man.
Okay.
Well. The reason I like One Punch Man is One Punch Man is so powerful that he can just demolish any opponent with a single punch. And people don't know this, but this story was inspired by my life. It was loosely inspired by my life, and so I feel like I have to pay respects to the show for being based on my background. Sam Shamoun equals unleash the beast for Muslims.
Hey, somebody's asking us to do something about the numerical miracles of the Quran. Maybe we should do at least one video sometime today about that.
The numerical miracles of the Quran?
Shabir Ali has made popular, the numerical pattern that he tried to use against you in your debate. Mm-hmm. And tell me that's not an act of desperation, that now you've run out of arguments. First, it was the scientific, the miraculous scientific nature of the Quran. And once that was debunked, now sharp, informed Muslims have abandoned it for the most part. Even like a Muslim apologist like Hamza Sortsis in UK, he was checked by fellow Muslims as well as former Muslims turned atheists that all the claims he made for the scientific miracles of the Quran, like embryology, much of that information you can find in pre-Islamic sources. So he's pretty much abandoned that approach. So now they're arguing mathematical patterns of the Quran as proof of its divine origin. And yet when you point out something similar in the Bible, they say, well, no, that's just Christians spinning it, like you did in your debate, right?
Yeah, well, you can kind of do that with almost anything. You can take anything and find the mathematical marvels, because what you do is you let's say you're counting a number of words. Well, if you count a number of words and then a different number of words and it doesn't equal some mathematical marvel, well, you ignore that one, right? You ignore that one. and you keep going through different words and counting them up and counting the occurrence and things like that until you get to some pattern, and then you say, haha, it's a mathematical marvel. But then you even see some more creative ways of dealing with the issue. So for instance, it's the common claim that in the Quran uses the word day 365 times. You've heard this, right?
Yes.
The Quran uses the word day 365 times. Isn't that a miracle that Allah knew that
It should be 365 days.
Yes, that there are 365 days mentioned. Until you actually start looking at that claim and you find out it's absolute nonsense, right? Yeah. So there are more than 400 occurrences of the word day in the Quran. What they do is they take out the word plural, and then they take out a certain case, and so they start taking out different forms of the word day until they get the word day in certain forms adds up to 365. And why did they exclude all these other ones? There's no real explanation. It's just this is what we need to do in order to get to the number 365 in order to claim that there's a miracle here. But then it gets presented to people. They don't say, hey, we got the number 365 by doing all these mental gymnastics and playing around with the numbers until we got to the number 365, because the word day actually occurs more than 400 times. They don't say that. They just go up to an unbeliever and say, did you know that the word day occurs in the Quran 365 times? How could Allah know this? It's a miracle. And it's just outright deception.
Well, here's the thing. Do they tell him that the Islamic calendar is not actually 365 days?
365.
Yeah, lunar calendar, right?
I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, why would you even rely on our calendar if that's the case? Why should you should follow the Bible then? If you believe 365 days, why do we have even an Islamic calendar? Here's the thing. I want to tell people, by the way, which Quranic manuscript are you following when it comes to the numerical argument? Do you know that there are a lot of missing passages in the early Quran, basically? Okay. I mean, the best, basically, Quran that we have right now, the early Quran is the top copy, has more than 2,200 actually problems in it and variations. That's the best we have.
And regardless, I mean, if you go with Ibn Masud's Quran, he didn't believe that Surah 1, Surah 113, and Surah 114 are supposed to be in the Quran. Right? So his Quran had 111 chapters. Well, if you go with his Quran, then
it doesn't work.
That throws off your mathematical marbles.
Or Ubay
ibn Ka'b. He had 2 extra chapters,
exactly.
Right? He had 116, not 114. So he had 2 additional chapters. That's going to throw off your mathematical marbles. And what's interesting is Muhammad told his followers, if you want to learn the Quran from anyone, he named 4 people. Ubay and Ibn Masud were 2 of the 4, and Ibn Masud was number 1. That was his top guy to learn the Quran from. The top scholar of the Quran, according to Muhammad himself.
So take the average.
Said that this Quran contains 3 chapters that aren't supposed to be in the Quran. Now, that presents you with a problem, because I would assume Muhammad knows who the best guy with respect to the Quran is.
Right.
So if Muhammad knows, then guess what? This Quran contains extra chapters. Or if you Muslims believe this is the correct Quran, then Muhammad didn't know. Yeah. Muhammad didn't know who knew the Quran and who didn't. And so that calls a lot into question. Well, I'm getting some comments about people don't know who you are, but they see how you're dressed. So some people are saying, is this a debate?
All right. Well, here's the thing. Al Fadi, it's short for Abdul Fadi, servant of the Redeemer. I'm a former Muslim from Saudi Arabia. Of course, this is how we dress up in Saudi. I'm proud of my heritage, proud of my culture, proud of my country, basically, my people. And because I'm a former Muslim, I want to reach out to my people. I want to respect the culture, and I want to dress up like them to show them that Jesus works even in Saudi. And that's the reason why I am basically sitting with these fabulous brothers here dressed up this way. And you can always learn more about me, of course, if you want. Go to my Facebook page, alfadi.sira. Go to my also actual ministry page, Sira International. Go to my website, sirainternational.com. So you'll find out about me more in there. But Google me as Al Fadi as well.
All right. David Solomon is concerned about a passage in the Quran. I guess he thinks it might be wrong, right?
No way.
He's claiming that, according to the Quran, semen is formed between the backbone and ribs. So he says, please talk about Surah 86, 5 through 7. Sperm come from the backbone. Now, obviously, if we've learned anything about the Quran, it's that it's filled with scientific miracles. I mean, if Allah could get all of the numerical miracles correct, he can obviously get the scientific miracles correct. So, not according to the science of the kuffar.
The science of the kuffar.
According to the science of
Quran.
Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Azza wa Jal.
Where does semen come from? And this is important for those of you who are watching who may be in medical school or younger. If you're in biology class, you need to learn the true science from the Quran.
Get your money back. Get your money back, basically.
If you open up, let me read from the Yusuf Ali translation because the server's slow for. By the way, we have our own Quran browser that's attached to Answering Islam. For those of you who don't know, we've all written for the Answering Islam website, answering-islam.org. We have our own Quran browser. It's a kind of weird URL, but we're having technical difficulties. But we have our own Quran browser. Now, in 86:5-7, here's the Yusuf Ali translation.
Now let man but think from what he has created. He is created from a drop emitted, proceedings from between the backbone and the ribs. And the Quran refers regularly to the drop that's emitted, right? This is the drop of semen that you're created from.
Yeah, so, but now, last time I checked, I thought that semen was produced in the testes area.
Well, you have a couple different things that mix together to form semen, but it's not coming from the backbone and the ribs, right? It's not coming from this area here, right?
Yeah. So but I thought one Muslim told me that it's produced in the medulla oblongata.
Medulla?
Medulla oblongata.
What does the medulla
just
have
the plain
anything to do with
reading.
it?
The plain reading of the passage shows you this is nonsense. This is why Muslims have to then reinterpret the meaning of those words. I've actually seen Muslims say it's not referring to male semen. It's actually referring to male sperm and the female ovum. That when it talks about, it's talking about the two coming together, that the male sperm fertilizes the ovary in the woman. That's how they explain the text. Now,
where
for the
does it
life
say
of
that
me,
in the text?
that's my point. For the life of me, you can read that passage, and I challenge anyone, just read the passage on its own, and I want to see someone coming up with that interpretation on their own without someone spinning it.
Exactly.
We have a defense. It looks like
Of who?
unless he's making fun of it, but. Darwish Salam says, well, if I break my back at 25, can I still have kids?
Wasn't that the
That was
argument?
Osama Abdullah, right?
Argument.
That was Osama Abdullah's response. So let's think about so for everyone who didn't follow the objection, the Quran says that the drop of semen that creates you comes from between the backbone and the ribs. So it comes from this area, right? We know biologically that semen does not come from this area. It comes from a bit lower. And the response of actual Muslim apologists like Osama Abdullah is that, well, if you break your back, then the parts down there won't work for you to have kids. And so the Quran is correct. Well, what did the Quran say? It says not that, hey, if you break your back, that you're going to have a problem. That doesn't show you that that's where semen comes from. We know where semen comes from. I mean, follow me here, right?
Yes.
If I chop your head off, you can't have sex anymore. You can't produce semen. Therefore, semen comes from your brain.
The medulla oblongata.
Do you see this?
Yeah.
This is absolutely ridiculous.
Now
And
I know. Now
this
I
is
know.
what
Oblongata, man.
actual Muslim apologists
you?
have to do in order to rescue what Allah said. But now, if you want to say what this verse actually means is this or that or something else, isn't the Quran supposed to be clear? I mean, there are theological claims that human beings aren't going to understand, and in that sense, yes, there are things that are going to be beyond human comprehension. But on these issues where Allah is giving knowledge, that's what this is supposed to be, right? You're supposed to think. This is a command to think about from what you're created. Well, what am I supposed to be thinking I'm created from? From a drop of semen that comes from between the backbone and the ribs.
Yeah,
I can't think that because I know how semen is formed.
Just to confirm what you said, there are over a dozen passages where the Quran goes out of its way to say that this is a book that provides a full exposition, fully details all of its passages in plain Arabic for people who can understand. I'll just mention three. Chapter 6, verse 114 of the Quran, 6:114, 1689, and chapter 41, verse 3. These passages say that the Quran is in plain Arabic, and that it gives a full exposition, a detailed explanation of not just the book, but of all its verses. So we would expect that if the Quran was referring to something other than this general area, it would provide the necessary details to make that point specifically clear. So much for the clear Quran.
A simple Christian pointed out Sam is wrong. It doesn't come from the medulla oblongata. It comes from the Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. Yes, you better believe it.
Yeah, it is from Hakuna Matata. That's for sure.
Quick, we actually have some good ones coming up, and a lot of them are things I haven't commented on before. Is it true that Muhammad was born 4 years after his dad died? That's kind of a problem with the Muslim sources, right?
Let me explain what he's trying to say. According to the Muslim sources, Muhammad's father and grandfather both got married around the same time. And our brother here would be the expert on the life of Muhammad, because you were pretty much reared on the life of Muhammad until the Lord Jesus Christ saved you out of that darkness. Yeah. So he has an uncle roughly the same age, supposed to be the same age, Hamza. Muhammad's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, right, and his father, Abdullah, got married around the same time, right? And they both got their wives pregnant around the same time. However, Hamza is 4 years older than Muhammad.
And Muhammad's father died.
Yes, and Muhammad's father died before Muhammad was born. So the question is, how can Hamza and Muhammad, Hamza be 4 years older than Muhammad, when Hamza was conceived in his mother's womb around the same time Muhammad was supposed to be conceived in his mother's womb, and yet Muhammad's father died before he was born? How do you account for the 4-year discrepancy? So this leads some Christians to assume Abdullah wasn't his father. That
it was 4 years later,
yes,
his wife was unfaithful.
Someone got her pregnant later, but still, in order to save her from shame, they associated the child with Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib.
Now, my reckoning would be I just don't trust the Muslim sources enough to be that technical, right?
Yes.
I mean, you could go to one and it will say, you could go to one passage in Bukhari and it will say 10 years after Muhammad started receiving his revelations, he left for Medina. You go to another, it says 12 years after, right? So I just wouldn't take them that seriously.
Yeah, that's why we don't use that argument.
Yeah.
You never hear us use that argument because like you said, the dating and the ages in the Muslim sources, they're very contradictory and not completely reliable.
All right, here's one from David Shelton. Hussein, for those of you who don't follow One Imam's channel, Hussein is a former Muslim. It says, Hussein on One Imam taught how the name Allah is not the actual Arabic word for God, and yet I know Arabic Bibles use the word Allah for God. Can you guys give a balanced view on this? So what would be the pros and cons there? What do you start
Hussein's
with? Hussein's
asking the question?
Hussein, I haven't seen the video, but Hussein made the claim that the Arabic word for God is not actually Allah.
Let me interject something
why
real quickly about the Arabic Bible, and then I'll let Brother Sam comment on that. Now, we know that the earliest Arabic Quran available dates around the late 9th century, and it does have the word Allah in it. We know that the Van Dyke translation of the Bible does have Allah in it. Many of the Arabic Bible translations, modern one, have Allah in it. But the theory is that Islam was so dominant that it forced probably many of the Christians at that time to utilize the name Allah in it. However, this is just a theory. I'd like to hear from Sam what he thinks also about the origin of the word itself and how it made itself even into the Quran, that the pagans knew him by Allah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, this is going to be a good question, somewhat controversial. The term Allah, according to many scholars, and there are even some Muslims who will admit this. Some won't admit this because they believe Allah is the eternal name of God. So it has no beginning. So Allah is a name that's eternal, uncreated, because that's the name of God, and His names are not created or derived. That's what some Muslim scholars will say. For the other Muslims or scholars who are not Muslims, they'll tell you that Allah is a contraction of two words. El-Ilah. El, the definite article, the, and Ilah. So if Hussein is saying that Allah, the word itself, doesn't mean God, well, in one sense it means the God. The word for God, the generic term for God is ilah. So if that's what he's saying, then on linguistic grounds, grammatically, he'd be correct. But if he's saying that the term Allah is not an appropriate name for the God of the Bible because it is a name that pagans used for a pagan deity, well, that introduces a whole host of problems because as he mentioned, the Quran itself testifies. Now, so again, how much weight you give to the Quran? That the Christians and the Jews at the time of Muhammad had no problem calling God Allah in Arabic. How do we know? Chapter 9, verse 30. The Jews say, Uzair is the son of Allah. The Christians, Nasara, say that Jesus is the son of Allah. So if we take the Quran as accurately describing the conversations that Muhammad is having with Jews and Christians. So here the Quran is bearing witness that Jews and Christians are calling God Allah. In fact, it even says that the Christians were calling Allah the Messiah, the son of Mary. So it depends on how much weight you put on the testimony of the Quran. Is the Quran, even though it's not the word of God, is it at least an accurate record to some extent on some of the conversations that are taking place between Jews and Christians and Muslims, or Muhammad in particular? If you say yes, then here you have evidence the Christians and the Jews are calling God Allah, and they had no problem with it, without this implying that the Allah of the Quran is the same Allah revealed in the person of Christ in the Holy Bible.
Yeah, there would be no disputing that the Allah of the Quran is different from the God of the Bible. The question is with the use of the term, right?
Yes.
And I guess we would have to watch Hussein's video to actually know what his claims were to see if we agree. And Hussein's a good apologist. He's sharp. So, but we're basically not clear on what the claim is. As far as using a term that could be used for other deities or something like that. Well, I mean, in the Greek New Testament, they use the word theos for God. So the Jewish writers of the New Testament, who would have known God as Yahweh or as Adonai, they had no problem using the word theos, which was a Greek term, which would be used for Greek gods. They had no problem using a kind of generic term, like our word God, right? You can use our word God for God. You can say, God, please bless so-and-so, or you can say false gods, right? Or you can say the God of Islam. We're using a term because it's kind of a generic term. So yes, there's clearly a distinction between the God of the Quran and the God of the Bible.
To add a point to what you said, at the time of Christ, Zeus was called Ha-Theos Ha-Pater. Ha-Theos, the God, Ha-Pater, the Father. The same terms used of the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Does that mean that Jesus' father is Zeus? Or these are just terms that people would use to refer to any deity that they worshipped?
Here's a quick one. Knowing Christianity says, are there contradictions in the creation event in the Quran?
Yes.
You have several, right? You have with the numbering of the days, but even the most basic one in the order of heavens and earth. What was that?
Because the browser is down, I can have you look at the verses if they want, but you just go to chapter 41, verses 9 to 12.
Just break it down for them.
Yeah, chapter 41, verses 9 to 12 of the Quran. There it says that Allah created the earth in 2 days, and then created the earth's nourishments in 4 days, and then He turned to the heavens when it was still smoke, right, and said to it and the earth, do you come willingly or unwillingly? Which is an interesting conversation to have with heaven and earth, right? Asking heaven and earth, do you come willingly or unwilling? And they both said, we come willingly. Then He fashioned the heaven into 7 heavens in 2 days. So earth first, then its nourishments, total of 4 days, and then, 2 days to create the earth, 4 days for its nourishments. Last time I checked, 2 and 4 is 6, right? But then an additional 2 days to create heaven into 7 heavens. So totally you have 8 days. So it's the earth, its nourishments, total of 6 days, and then 7 heavens, another 2 days, that's 8 days. This contradicts the sequence in chapter 79, verses 27 to 33 of the Quran, where it says that He fashioned the heavens first and then created the earth's nourishments. And other passages like chapter 2, verse 29 says He did it in a total of 6 days. So which is it?
And if He fashioned heavens later, so what was there actually?
Yeah, right. In fact, where was the earth suspended? If you don't have heaven, where was it, right?
Yeah.
Yet I don't know.
And I wonder if they did not come willingly, what would have happened?
Right? I mean, to even have that conversation,
would have had a cosmic disaster.
That's another thing we need to emphasize.
But He might have had to smack and beat them for the rebellion.
You better believe it. But you know what? Honestly, one thing people don't realize, and Ibn Kathir confirms this, Muhammad believed everything had consciousness. Everything. Stars had consciousness. Trees had consciousness. Stones. That's why stones and trees would talk to Muhammad. The sun has consciousness. In one of the Islamicized videos, we talk about the sun actually prostrating before the throne of Allah.
You can see in the comments people like that.
Yeah. And it's I'm not lying. It's chapter 36, verse 38 of the Quran. And read the commentaries by Ibn Kathir, Jalalain, even the Hadith. Muhammad told Abu Dhar that the sun travels all the way to the throne of Allah and bows before Allah and waits to get permission from Allah to return on its course.
I'm thankful they come back again.
Yeah, but the time will come where Allah will say, no, go rise from the west.
That's right.
He says the day will come,
the end of
Yom al-Qiyam, that instead of coming from the east, it will come from the west, and that will be the sign that the end has broken upon us. So yeah, Muhammad believed everything had consciousness. Trees.
Now, Al, Rafay is asking, can you talk about the so-called miraculous form of the Quran? You know what that's talking about? Because
I have no idea what he means.
I've read the Quran. It is the most disorganized, least coherent book I've ever read.
I'm not so sure really what the exact specific points, but let me tell you this. There is a lot of controversy about how the Quran was put together anyway. Was it organized during the time of the Prophet and it finalized the first time during the time of Uthman and Abu Bakr? I should say Abu Bakr and Omar, and then the second time during Uthman. Or was it just bits and pieces, which we know that there are a lot of traditions that tell us parts of it were missing. You've heard already a couple of times we alluded to Aisha's goat, holy goat, who ate one of those passages. So we don't know how it was put together, honestly. And also you have chapter 8 and 9 that some claim that it used to be one chapter. All of a sudden, Uthman decided to divide them. There is no basmala in between. So I'm not so sure really what form are we talking about. Chronologically speaking, the Quran is not put together this way. And there is even so many theories about its chronology.
So that's what I'm saying. That kind of blew me off. What miraculous structure of the Quran? Is there any?
I'm wondering too. So if you want to be more specific, let us know. But we don't think the Quran
is anything but a miracle.
The Quran is an organizational catastrophe.
Wade
O. Wales says, does the ordinary Muslim in the U.S. read the Quran and the Hadith for him or herself? If so, why do most Muslims in the West only follow the peaceful teachings? Now, you guys may have different experience, but I was actually shocked at how little Muslims know, not only about the Hadith, of course, but even also of the Quran. And the reason is when you see Muslims and you see them going to the mosque and you see them dressing a certain way and you see them fasting for Ramadan, you just assume these are people who know a lot about their religion, that they know a lot about their sources. And so for a while, I assumed that Muslims are very knowledgeable about their sources, more knowledgeable than an average Christian would be of Christian sources. And it was actually when I started debating, when I would say something in a debate and Muslims would come up to me afterwards and say, you have no clue what you're talking about, and they make all sorts of claims. And I would start bringing up verses of the Quran and bringing up passages of the Hadith, but think even more so of the Quran. I'm quoting the Quran to them, and they had no clue what I was talking about, right? Your average Muslim has no clue, absolutely no clue what the Quran says about the Bible. Zero clue. They have no clue what the Quran says about issues regarding violence towards unbelievers. They just have, it's like they've never even seen the verses before unless Christians are bringing them up to them. So, and by the way, and you guys may have a different understanding here. I think this is actually the impact of what the Quran says in passages like 465, where if you even have a slight resistance against something that Muhammad has said, then you're not a real Muslim.
Precisely.
Or against Muhammad saying that innovation, coming up with your own view of things, coming up with your own interpretation, your own way of doing things, is a one-way ticket to hell. Every innovator is going to hell. I think that because of what the Quran and Muhammad taught about the severity of getting something wrong, that the impact this has had on the Muslim community over the centuries has been, you either need to learn all of it, or you need to learn none of it 100%. Except what your leaders tell you. Because your leaders, your sheikhs,
you don't want to take a chance.
They're the ones who've studied it all. Right. Because think about this. If you decide, hey, I'm just going to read a couple chapters of the Quran and come to my conclusions about Islam. Well, without knowing the historical background that are found in other Muslim sources, you don't know what this passage is answering. You don't know if this is abrogated by something that came along later in history. You don't know because the Quran's totally disorganized. You don't know whether this verse abrogates this. It's out of order. So you can't know what you're supposed to actually follow or do without going to outside sources. So if you're just reading the Quran and coming to your conclusions, you're going to get something wrong. And you may, because you got this wrong, not even be a Muslim anymore according to the Quran. Or because you might actually end up innovating, in which case you're going to hell. So if you just learn a little bit of this, you're in all kinds of danger. So if you want to really learn it and know what to do, you have to learn it all. You have to go through all the Muslim sources. And so the impact that this has had over the Muslims on Muslims over the centuries is learn it all or learn none of it and do what your leaders tell you. So is that, would you guys share that impact?
I 100% agree with you. I just want to add one thing. I was going to say that the average Muslim is knowledgeable about his sources just as much as the average Christian is about the Bible. But you said something that I agree with. Actually, there is a higher level of ignorance among Muslims concerning their sources than there are among Christians. But do you expect the average Christian to know much about the biblical contents or about the Trinity, et cetera, et cetera? No, we don't expect that, right? Why would you expect that of an average Muslim who's a cultural Muslim, right? He identifies with Muslim because he's born into a Muslim home, but really doesn't take his religion that much, that seriously.
And the Quran actually, like David mentioned, tells you just listen to Allah, to the Prophet, and the learned ones, meaning the scholars. So people take it for granted. It's like, okay, well, my Imam told me this, that's it. He must know, therefore I'm just in obedience, I'm following his interpretation. By the way, just to let people know that we will be doing another series that we will take passages from the Quran that supports the authenticity of the Bible, and we'll talk about that.
Speaking of innovation, this is something interesting. I was writing an article on, I didn't finish it, but maybe you'll eventually do a YouTube video. He mentioned Muhammad saying innovation is bad. All innovation is bad. Bid'ah is bad, and it will land you in the hellfire. Did you know that the compilation of the Quran is
Let's
bid'ah?
clarify. We're talking about religious innovation here.
Well, what
Right?
other...
I don't want people to think like...
when Muhammad is talking...
You invented a new car,
Yeah. I mean, so it's talking about in the religious context. But what's interesting about that is the Muslim sources testify the Quran that they hold in their hands is an innovation. It's a bid'ah, not approved by Muhammad, because the compilation of the Quran took place when Muhammad died. To prove that it's an innovation, you'll find in Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, 509, when Umar approached Abu Bakr, the caliph, and he said, look, we have suffered a great loss on the battlefield among the Hufaz, the memorizers of the Quran, and I fear that much of the Quran will be lost if we don't compile the Quran in one volume. And then Abu Bakr hesitated, saying, do you want me to do something that Allah's Messenger himself did not do?
That's right.
And then he persuaded Abu Bakr. Then they went to Zayd ibn Thabit.
Yeah.
He then responded the same way. Would you have me do you want me to do something that Allah's Messenger did not do? Now notice, they're admitting compiling the Quran in one volume is something that Allah's Messenger did not do. It's an innovation. It was a new idea that they came up with. But Muhammad said all bid'ah, and there's a narration, all of it, not some of it.
Right.
It will land you in hellfire.
Yeah, and
so the Quran will land Muslims in hellfire.
Yeah, and by the way, me and Jay Smith talked about this in the series that we did. But here's what I like about what you just mentioned. I thought Muslims tell us that Muhammad had the entire Quran in a closet when he died.
Why did Abu Bakr access it?
Nope, the Muslim sources specifically say the Quran had not been collected. So, and I mean, this is something, I mean, think about this, because Muslims don't get this. The only reason we even think of the Quran as a book now was because so much of it was lost that they put it into a book so that more wouldn't be lost. And for some reason, nope, Muhammad had this right here, and he was walking around carrying this, and that's how things work in fantasy land. Question for Al and for Sam: is the Quran in pure Arabic? The Quran certainly makes that claim, right?
Now, the Quran testifies about itself that it's in pure Arabic, but the Quran does contain other foreign language in it, of course. But here's the argument that is so funny, and Sam can elaborate further. Scholars, of course, are troubled by this. Like you have Suyuti and others, by the way, did mention this. The way they get around that is say, even if it was a Greek word or a Persian word or Latin word, the minute it lands in the Quran, it becomes an Arabic word.
That's exactly what they say. Now, let me respond to that. I've heard Jamal Badawi and other Muslims say, well, living languages adapt other words from other languages that become part and parcel of a particular language. Like many English words are Arabic in origin. Algebra, alcohol, right? The al-Kali, they say these are actually Arabic words that came through Latin into English. No one would say they're not English words. Here's the problem with that argument. Now, I don't know if all Muslims agree that the Arabic Quran is eternal and created, because I know people will say that the Quran is eternal, but not the Arabic version of it. I've actually heard some Muslims say,
really?
Yeah, that the Quran was made in Arabic Quran, but the original Quran is eternal, uncreated, but it was made into an Arabic Quran. But traditionally, from what I understand, what I heard, the Arabic Quran is eternal and created. So for the life of me, I can't understand how an eternal Arabic language can adopt foreign words that did not exist in eternity. How does that work? Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, so God agrees then with the Greek language.
But there was no Greek language in eternity. No, my point is, if the Arabic Quran is eternal, uncreated, there was no Greek language in eternity for the Arabic of Allah to adopt and borrow the words from.
But here's my argument, Sam.
Yeah.
God knew there is a Greek language
Oh,
that
okay,
will
sorry.
exist, and therefore, why do our Muslim friends disagree with the Greek New Testament?
Yeah, well, yeah, then because of his foreknowledge, he knew that these languages would exist because he'd create them, and he could then adopt words that did not exist yet as part of the Arabic language. That means all these languages are sacred, especially the Greek New Testament. But so for the Muslim, he's going to have to struggle with that. If you believe the Arabic Quran is eternal and created, that means this is a language that has no beginning. It predates all other languages because all other languages were created, right? How can an eternal, uncreated language adopt words from languages that don't exist? Now, if they want to argue, well, Allah foreknew, that means the language of Allah is dependent on languages that do not exist, and those languages necessarily have to come into existence.
So, Firdaus, for instance, you have to.
Yeah.
Huris,
Yes,
it's amazing.
So that means these languages by necessity had to be created.
That's right.
So that means Allah had to create them and had no choice. He wasn't free in the matter.
So
the-
Allah is
the-
dependent on languages
Yes,
then.
exactly.
Yeah, the eternal Arabic of Allah was insufficient to convey
Yes.
the messages
message.
that he wanted to
I
convey,
thought it was a clear
and
message.
therefore
Yes.
he had to draw from languages that he foreknew would come into existence
David,
from all
That had to
eternity.
come into
Okay,
existence.
I got it. We got it.
you
We-
are
we- we've made this
innovating. You
coherent.
are innovating
We've
right
made
now.
this coherent. No, that's exactly what you have to believe in order
Exactly.
to reconcile these claims. The Guardian says, David, where's your infidel cat? Well, it wasn't actually my cat. It was my friend's cat. But that cat is now in the
Under security.
in the witness protection program after numerous fatwas, or should I say, katwas. Micaias Johannes says, hello guys, can each of you clarify for us what really convinced you of Muhammad being a false prophet biblically and from the Quranic text? Well, that would easily take up the next
Yes.
the next 20 minutes. I'll give you a link right here. I'm posting it right now in the chat. Let me see. I'm posting a link in the chat. It's to a series called 50 Reasons Muhammad Was Not a Prophet.
yeah.
Sam and I went through the series years ago, but we went through 50 reasons Muhammad was not a prophet. And that includes both biblical problems with the prophethood of Muhammad and problems with the prophethood of Muhammad from Islamic sources. So you can go ahead and take a look at those. Either of you like to say in brief why
Yeah,
you
well,
would
real
reject
briefly,
Muhammad?
well, the Quran bears witness to the veracity and incorruptibility of the previous scriptures, meaning the Bible. And therefore, if the Quran contradicts the Bible, then the Quran is wrong and Muhammad is a false prophet. And you can't get any clearer that Muhammad is an antichrist according to the scriptures than 1 John 2, 22, 23. Who's the antichrist? The antichrist is one who denies the Father and the Son. What do you find Muhammad doing in the Quran? Allah is not the Father, Jesus not the Son. So that's one of the strongest proofs, to me at least, that Muhammad is a false prophet, because he contradicts the message of the prophets and the scriptures that were in existence before his time, which he came to bear witness to, not to claim they had been corrupted. So to be real brief.
Sophia Films mentions, isn't it interesting that the Quran doesn't contain prophets from Ishmael's line, but that of Isaac's? That's a good question to ask the Muslims.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, you do have a couple extra prophets in the Quran, right?
Yes.
The Quran, I think, mentions 25 prophets by name, but you do have a couple that aren't mentioned.
Salih, right? I mean, we really don't know their lineage, but the fact of the matter
But
is...
it is interesting that the prophets would be from the line of
Yeah,
Well,
it's
45
chapter 29, 27.
Yes,
It says that.
Even 45:16 says prophethood, commandment, and the scripture was entrusted to the children of Israel.
That's right.
45:16. It specifically says prophethood, the commandment, and scripture were given to the children of Israel as a possession, as part of the covenant Allah made with the children of Israel. Now, what's more interesting to me is that although Ishmael's mentioned, you don't find any explicit reference to Ishmael being the ancestor, the progenitor of Muhammad.
And he was mentioned later.
Yes.
If you take the Quran chronologically, it was at least 14 years later before
Exactly.
he
Yeah.
was mentioned.
Yeah. If you take exactly, it's like, in fact, if you actually read the Quran carefully, and maybe we'll do a show on it, you can actually make the case that Ishmael, Isaac, and Jacob are all brothers.
Yeah, I read your argument.
Ishmael,
about that.
Isaac, and Jacob are all brothers, so that Isaac is not the father of Jacob, but that Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob are brothers. Or you're going to have to argue Ishmael's the father of Isaac, who's the father of Jacob, because the way the Quran speaks of their relationship, it's incoherent, unintelligible, but that would have to wait for a future session. But fact of the matter is, yes, there are no prophets from Ishmael, and nowhere in the Quran does it say Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael.
That's right.
Nowhere. Nothing explicit. You can't prove it. I challenge any Muslim to refute us.
Absolutely. I asked this question many times.
Question: do you think that Islam is the beast from the book of
that was
Revelation.
asked yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and give my brief perspective,
Yeah,
then you
go
guys.
ahead,
Every generation sort of looks at the big problem of its time and says, this is the beast of Revelation. So it's certainly easy to look at Islam and make that claim. Also, when you have so many of the cities associated with the book of Revelation and even the Old Testament prophecies about the end times that are currently in the Islamic world. So you could look at that and start thinking that this is something huge in the end times, but really we don't know the day or the hour. Christ could return very soon. Christ might not return for another 5,000 years, and Islam might not even be a distant memory by that time.
Hopefully.
So yeah.
In Jesus' name, yeah. By the way, interestingly, someone earlier, didn't he call me the beast?
Oh yeah, it's a different kind of beast.
So now
Yeah, you're not the
that'd be
beast of Revelation.
I'm
You're just,
thinking maybe saying maybe.
and I
I'm
wouldn't
the
even say
beast.
the beast. I would say like a beast.
Gorgeous beast. Oh, let me
it's,
be
it's
quite
debatable.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Let me be quite frank. I'm not convinced with the theory, the position, and some of the brothers who do hold this position, they are brothers in the Lord who love Jesus and are doing great work. So when I say I don't hold this theory, doesn't mean I don't respect these men as my brothers and sisters
Yeah,
in Christ.
Joel Richardson, so right?
Yeah, no, he's a
Doing-
great
doing
brother in the
work,
Lord.
yeah.
Great man of God. May the Lord bless him. And he's a tremendous
And I would say you should trust people who spend a lot of time dealing with this issue more than me, because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Islam's role to the end
Yeah.
times, right? There are people who spend a lot
Joel
more
Richardson
time
would be one
focusing on that.
authority. He'd be one authority. So if you want to get his books, read his articles, he is an authority. But here's why I don't subscribe to it. According to Revelation and 2 Thessalonians 2, the beast, the man of lawlessness, is going to make himself out to be God and demand worship. He's going to demand people to worship him as God in defiance of Christ. For the life of me, I cannot see a Muslim figure can be accepted by the Muslim world and claim to be God and demand worship. See, this is my problem. You see my point? Because in Islam, if a Muslim claims to be God in the flesh, what Muslim will follow him? If he's a Muslim figure, they'll try to kill him, right? But you can't be the beast of Revelation if you don't claim to be a divine being, right? Worthy of worship, who's empowered by Satan, and demands people to worship him instead of Christ. So then how can the beast be a Muslim when the beast has to claim to be God in the flesh and worthy of all worship in defiance of Christ? And no Muslim can claim that because he's going to have a short career.
Yeah.
Right? Hope it made sense. I don't know.
Humberto, honest question, guys. If Muslims are praying to Muhammad,
Praying to Muhammad? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I forget. I'm sorry.
it means they're associating Muhammad with Allah.
Yep.
That's the point.
What would this mean for Catholics praying to Mary? Should we
Yeah.
condemn that?
No, okay.
So two
very
things
good
there. One, what does it mean here that Muslims actually pray
Yeah.
to Muhammad? Because every Muslim is going to say, "What? No, we pray to Allah." Well, let's talk about what's
Yeah.
actually in your prayers.
Yeah, let me be quite clear. Again, I'm not a Roman Catholic, I'm not an Orthodox, but I do believe we have true believers born of the Spirit in every major branch of Christianity.
Amen.
So there are born-again Christians who are Roman Catholic, Orthodox. I know some of the Reformed brothers will think I'm becoming ecumenical, be that as it may. The difference between, let's say, someone asking a saint in heaven to pray for them, and the difference between Muslims communicating to Muhammad or asking his intercession is this. Nowhere will you find in the scriptures, and this is again a challenge to all my Christian brothers and sisters, that quote unquote prayer, or let's say invocation to God in heaven, or let's say invocation to someone in heaven, is necessarily an act of worship. You won't find it. Whereas Muhammad defined dua, invocation, as the heart of worship. So
That's
you
right.
understand the difference?
That's right.
In our Christian understanding, prayer is communication. It's not just worship. So when I pray to God, I'm speaking to God, or I'm worshiping God, or a combination of both. But prayer in of itself, prayer meaning when I ask God or speak to God, that's not necessarily worship in of itself. It's communication. So when a Roman Catholic tells me he asks Mary to pray for him, I may disagree with him, I may agree with him, but that asking in of itself is not worship any more than if I ask you to pray for me, it's worship. Now someone said, well, yeah, but he's alive and he understands and he can hear and he's conscious of your request. Well, if you read the scriptures, they can make a strong case that people in heaven are alive, not dead. They're more alive and they're glorified in the presence of Christ. But I'm not here to make a case for the communion of saints. What I'm trying to say is, biblically, prayer in of itself does not necessarily mean worship. It can mean asking, invoking. Muhammad, on the other hand, said, to pray is to worship. Dua is worship. He said it's the heart of worship. So when a Muslim speaks to Muhammad in prayer, that is an act of worship, Islamically speaking, because salah, salawat, dua, according to Muhammad, are all acts of worship.
Just to be clear, because there are lots of people out there who don't know what we're talking about. I have a video on this titled Why Muslims Pray to Muhammad.
Yes.
But clarify for people what is being said. So just to be clear here, right?
Yes.
If you are praying and you say, God, please bless grandma, there you are talking to God about grandma. If you are praying, you're bowed down praying, and you start talking to grandma, there you're talking to grandma. You're not talking to God, you're talking directly to grandma.
Yeah.
And then that would become a question of how you justify or defend that theologically. I talked to a Catholic priest once about, hey, what's going on when you talk to Mary? And he said, well, we don't, and different Catholics are going to give different answers, but he said we don't believe that Mary just miraculously hears everyone wherever we go. We believe that God actually reveals to her what people have said. So they're using that to show that she doesn't have this divine attribute of omniscience, that God actually takes the prayer to her, and then she uses that. She uses that to make requests of Jesus. We don't think like that, but that would be a question for Catholics to justify. The idea here is once you start talking to someone other than God in your prayers, how are you going to justify that? Well, Muslims actually talk directly to Muhammad
5 times a day
during their daily prayers, right? During their daily prayers. Again, if I say, God, please bless grandma with peace, that's me talking to God about grandma. If I say, oh, I want peace for you, grandma, there I'm talking to grandma during my prayers, right? And don't Muslims speak directly to Muhammad during their daily prayers?
If anyone who would know, it would be Al, because 5 times a day as a Muslim, he would actually say, Assalamu alayka.
That's right.
So can you explain what the part of that
so
prayer?
it's part of the prayer. You pray to Abraham, and you pray also
and you greet Muhammad. You say, peace be upon you, O Prophet, and blessing. Assalamu alayka, Ahyu Nabi.
I want to challenge my Muslim
And that was commanded
friends.
by Muhammad.
Yes.
Correct. I want to challenge my Muslim friends.
It's called tashahud.
Can you be a Muslim without invoking Muhammad in a shahada? That in and of itself, you've already elevated Muhammad to be equal to God.
Yeah.
Right there. I mean, we don't even have to go anywhere beyond that.
By the way, we just got the Roman Catholics excited. Now they want to say, well, sola scriptura is questionable. See what happened?
You see?
Even though
now they're going to invite you to a Roman Catholic church.
Listen,
so you can explain that.
Petros, London, you're more than welcome to come to my Pal Talk room and debate me on sola scriptura, whether it's biblical or not, but that's not the topic.
I suspect you're going to get schooled on that one. So pick a different debate opponent on that one.
Or pick a different name.
Because I've seen some people go after Sam on that one, and it did not turn out well for that one.
Yeah, so let's keep it on Islam.
But the idea is Muslims aren't saying in their prayers, right? And these are the prayers according to Muhammad. Yeah. And if you can even, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, just go to a Muslim site, right? Go to a Muslim video that includes the translation of what's being said.
Yep.
And go to a Muslim video and that's titled something like, what do I recite in prayer as a Muslim?
Tashahud.
Yeah. And it will give you the Arabic. And keep watching. There's a part where it's peace be upon you, O Prophet. Not
Assalamu
God,
alayka.
please bless Muhammad with peace, as if Muhammad, his eternal welfare depends on what you're saying about him now. I mean, do you seriously believe it? Why would you even be saying this? Yeah. But that aside, you speak directly. Muslims speak directly to Muhammad during their prayers. It's not God, please, but because this is their response. They say, what? What's the problem with asking God for peace upon Muhammad?
You're not asking God.
They're saying, peace be upon you. It's you.
Speaking
right?
to
That's
him.
Second person.
Speaking
if I say you, then I'm talking to you. And Muslims talk to Muhammad during their prayers. So, like the question for the Catholics would be, how do you reconcile this? How do you reconcile this with your concept of worship and prayer? And with Muslims, I mean, just imagine, because in Islam, they put such an emphasis on not associating any partner with Allah, with purity of worship.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be the purest worship in the world. If a Muslim saw any other group, a Christian, a Jew, a polytheist, speaking to a dead or alive in heaven human being. During their prayers, they would say, "You mushrik."
You got it.
That's right.
"You infidel, you idolater." Suddenly, when they do it,
It's okay.
it doesn't matter, right? It's the same thing like bowing down to the Kaaba,
Yeah.
right? If they saw anyone bowing down to anything, if they saw people circled around bowing down to this cup, they would say, "That is idolatry." And if I said, no, this is just to mark the direction of the prayer, that's why everyone's bowing down to this cup, they would say, "You liar, you infidel, you idol worshipers, stop this." And yet, here they are circling the Kaaba, bowing down to the Kaaba, kissing the black stone, but it's not idolatry when they do it.
I just want to emphasize this, Al, because I don't want to. Remember, nowhere can someone look at the Bible and look at prayer as meaning exclusively worship of God. I just want to be clear. But this is important. Muhammad said, Salah, salawat, and dua, invocation, Salah, salawat, prayer, are worship. And he says dua, invocation, is the heart of worship. That means when you speak to Muhammad in your prayer, that's worship according to Muhammad's own definition. So it's much more damaging for the Muslim than it is, let's say, for other traditions. So just want to make that clear.
And I know we're getting closer to the end of our live stream here, but a question by Dimitri, and you and I had this conversation before, Sam. He's saying if Muhammad was a false and self-proclaimed prophet, why he was so strong believer. That's the way he asked the question.
Believer in what?
Believing in his cause, basically. And as I tell people all the time,
That's right, right.
I have no problem saying that Muhammad did see something, did hear something, did even believe that he was a prophet. That doesn't mean anything to me. All it
No, but
means
if
is
he's going
that...
to use that argument, then what does he say about Baha'u'llah, Baballah,
Exactly.
Mirza Ghulam Ahmed,
Exactly.
Joseph
They
Smith?
all were convinced that
Yeah.
they were cult.
What does that mean?
So and by the way, that's one of the reasons I believe that Muhammad was sincere, right? I mean, you could look at a lot of the things Muhammad did with marrying a divorced wife, his own adopted son, and getting a child bride, and receiving a revelation saying you can only have 4 wives, and then he gets 9 or 11 or more. You could look at just those details and say, well, this guy's obviously just making this up. But you look at other things. And on the whole, I would say this guy really thought he was getting his revelations from God. And so that's why he was so fervent in his belief that he did actually believe it.
Even Satan can masquerade as the angel of light.
Yeah.
So
I do believe, like our brother's saying, I know that's your position, Muhammad was demonized to a certain extent. And so, even though, like you said, some revelations are just convenient revelations, I mean, obviously you can see it's not always satanic. Some of the things are just, his own mind working. But I do believe there was a demonic apparition. And so that would account for sincerity. But if you're going to use that logic, you pretty much proved all these other religions that came after Islam to be true too. You even proved that Baha'u'llah and Baballah, didn't they spend over 23 years in prison for their conviction without recanting? So does that mean I should become now a Baha'i?
I know.
I mean, what kind of logic is this?
We cannot really just use these kind of arguments as if it's a proof of something.
Warrior Woman has a good one. She says, why do black people follow Muhammad when he called them raisin heads?
That's obvious.
We talked about that yesterday.
You do have lots of followers of Islam who are African Americans, right? That became popular in the 1960s with people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali preaching Islam, and there were lots of conversions to the Nation of Islam, and later many people leaving Nation of Islam and becoming Orthodox Muslims. The main reason you saw that is ignorance of the Muslim sources among Westerners, right? And what I mean here is that Muslim preachers come into an area, and in the West, there's just a massive ignorance of Islam. People don't know what the Muslim sources say. People don't know the history of Muhammad. And this is even more so in like the 1960s and the 1970s, where you didn't even have the Muslim sources available, right? You could get the Quran back then. But as far as, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, these books were translated into English in like the 90s, right? And the other Muslim sources since then. So in the 60s, in the 70s, Muslim preachers could come into area and say pretty much whatever they wanted, and no one would be in a position to correct them. So they were free to come into an area and say, Christianity is the religion that enslaves people. It's the pro-slavery religion. Just look at what happened to black people in American history. You see what Christianity does. And that's why you need to abandon Christianity and convert to a religion that celebrates diversity. Mohammed was the great liberator of slaves. And so come to a religion that supports the black community. Come to Islam. And people believed it. Why? No one knew what was in the Muslim sources, right? And it's not just a claim about where Muhammad called Ethiopians raisin heads. That's Muhammad bought, owned, sold, and traded black African slaves. His followers institutionalized the African slave trade 1,000 years before the United States even existed. Right? So Islam has been doing this a lot longer, and in fact, if you actually look at history, Christians did not like slavery. Right? A lot of slaves converted to Christianity, and so they knew the background. They knew the background of slavery and so on. And what you had is over several centuries in Europe, slavery was wiped out. It wasn't because of official laws. People just kept liberating slaves until slavery was gone from Europe. Now, after slavery was gone from Europe, if you were moving to a new area of the world, let's say you were moving to the New World, the Americas, and you are no longer going to be under the direct authority of Europe, and you could kind of focus on what's the quickest way to make as much money as possible. Well, it was in your financial interest to have cheap labor and therefore to bring slaves in. And since you didn't have the constant pressure of the European nations around you, you could get away with that sort of thing. So they had to start buying slaves. Where did they get those slaves? Well, there aren't any more slave markets in Europe, right? They're not selling slaves in Europe anymore. So you had to go elsewhere. You had to go to Africa, where the slave trade was alive and well, due in large part to Islam. So the reason you ended up with a race-based slavery in the United States was because Christians liberated slaves in Europe, and because the place where slavery was alive and well was in Africa, thanks in large part to Islam. So how idiotic is it to come along and say Christianity is the religion that enslaves black people and Islam is the religion that liberates black people? Especially when you think about it, the United States actually became a nation at the end of the 1700s. Slavery didn't last a century. Once the United States is formed as a nation, it didn't last a century. It's lasted 14 centuries in the Islamic world.
That's right.
And it wasn't even outlawed in places like Saudi Arabia, and apart from pressure from outside nations. John F. Kennedy was the one who compelled Saudi Arabia to make laws against slavery.
Many of the male slaves lost their life because of castration and things like that. I just posted a couple of articles, by the way, on my own Facebook on this, alfadi.sira, and people can go and read. And there is a new book that is coming out also to discuss this. And I did even an entire series, actually, with Jay Smith on this slavery, because people think about the transatlantic and they forget about the sub-Saharan, basically, slavery that lasted for 13 centuries, like you mentioned. I know we're approaching the end, brother.
Yeah, it is 11:58, but we're not done. We're going over to your
That's right. So
Facebook
we're
channel,
switching
right?
over now to my own Facebook page, The Al Fadi.
Yes.
THEALFADI.
The link is here. They got the link right here.
So people can go.
All right. So we're closing out this hour-long live stream on my channel, but we're not done. We're going to continue. The link is in the description box. Also notice there are links there in the description box to Al Fadi and Sam's YouTube channels. Be sure to subscribe to them. I know Sam's YouTube page has been pretty lame for a long time, just putting up Pal Talk, and so don't worry, I'm going to get him straight. I'm going to straighten him out on how YouTube works.
He's laid back, as you can tell.
Yeah. Very laid back.
He's way laid back.
Yeah, go ahead and subscribe to Sam's channel, and we'll make sure that he's getting some high quality Sam Shamoun style material up there. All right, see you all in a few minutes over on Al's Facebook page. Got